Hello, and welcome to The Thin Blue Mind. Each week we will be looking at current policing issues and topics within the UK. Our regular panel consists of Steve Bradshaw, who is a TV and theatre actor, Richard Horton, author, and me, Dave Thomas, broadcaster. What we all have in common is over 80 years of combined police service. Now retired, we will be providing opinion and insights from the unique position of having been there and done it. Steve spent the majority of his service on firearms before being promoted to inspector, where he was a force incident manager. Richard was a career detective before going back into uniform as a response sergeant. Myself, I spent the majority of my service on the roads policing unit before going into CID and child protection. You may not agree with everything we say, but we will make you think. The Thin Blue Mind with Bradshaw, Horton and Thomas. Policing insights and opinion. Well, hello, and welcome to this week's episode of The Thin Blue Mind. This week we have a new Prime Minister, so we're going to get all political and look at politics in policing, and by that we mean the Police and Crime Commissioner and the role that they play. Just to give a bit of a background to the role, previously police forces were overseen by police authorities, but the criticism of those panels was that they weren't elected by the public. So in 2010, the then government, the Conservative and Liberal coalition, set out to make the police more accountable to the public by a directly elected official. Later that year, they published a document called Policing in the 21st Century. And this was followed by the Police Reform and Social Responsibilities Act by our friend, the then Home Secretary, Theresa May. And that went on to say, it said, the establishment of PCCs has allowed for the Home Office to withdraw from day-to-day policing, giving the police a greater freedom to fight crime as they see fit and allowing local communities to hold police to account. I think we're all having a bit of a smile when I read that out. So the role of the PCC, the Police and Crime Commissioner, is to be the voice of the people and hold the police to account. They are responsible for the totality of policing, so they must secure efficient and effective policing for their area. They're responsible for appointing the Chief Constable and holding them to account and can indeed dismiss them. They set police and crime objectives, they set force budgets and precepts, and they contribute to the national and international policing capabilities, whatever that means. And they bring together community safety, which is criminal justice partners, and try to make it a joined-up service. So there we go. There's lots of issues, I suppose.
Well, let's not kid ourselves. These are political appointees. By and large, they represent one of the big political parties, more often than not the Conservatives or the Labour Party. And to get to where they are, they engage the support and the campaigning machinery of the local political parties. They are beholden to the local political parties for their position and for their candidacy. And if they want to get re-elected, then they're still beholden to having that same machinery try and get the vote out for them. That makes them a political appointee in my book. Interesting, despite the political nature and campaigning, the mandate, as in the turnout, is year on year awful. Despite whatever tricks they try and do to up the vote, having the PCC election on the same day as council elections, the mandates are really pathetic for the amount of power that is vested in this position. So we haven't got independent police and crime commissioners largely. I think we've largely got politically appointees where you'll have some otherwise uninspiring local councillor who's put forward for the post, gets the post, and all of a sudden they've got a huge budget, they've got the potential for taking over fire and rescue as well, if they want it. And the offices, I think, generally have grown like Mopsy. You've gone from having a local police committee based on local councillors and reflecting the local majorities and minorities, to having one political appointee with a term of office and indeed an office which has grown to expand for deputy police and crime commissioners and all manner of advisors and functionaries. I think it's been a terrible, terrible idea, and it's not playing out well.
I don't mind the actual potential intention of all this back in 2010. And I'm a big believer in us being accountable to the public. And the best way you are accountable to the public is if someone can vote you out or vote you in. because of what you want to do. So that in itself, I quite like the idea, and we've said before on these podcasts, what do the public want from policing? We need the public to be able to have a not only a say, but be part of the decision making. And decision making is, if you're in the top job, you either gain or lose your job by their vote. So I quite like that idea from a strategic intention. We need the public to be able to peek behind the curtain of policing in many ways. But I think the execution of it, as you say, Richard, has a lot to be desired. What's the turnout, 15%?
Well, I think that point that you raised, Steve, and ties in nicely with the point you raised as well, Richard, about turnouts. I was actually looking at the figures. 2012, which was the first PCC election, it averaged less than 15% of the electorate, and that was the lowest turnout of any election since World War II. And one of the criticisms of that, and you talk about lifting the curtain on policing, Steve, is that there was huge variations in the level of transparency from the PCCs, and they failed to publish much of their information that they had to publish under statute. And the Electoral Commission sort of kind of criticised ministers at the time because too few people had sufficient information to make an informed choice. In 2016, the turnout was 27.3%. And then in 2021, it was 33.2%. What was interesting, I found that in the 2016 elections, there was 20 Conservative PCCs, 13 Labour and 3 Independent. But last year's election was delayed due to COVID. There were 30 Conservative PCCs and 5 Labour.
The thing I will ask there, that follows the national picture, doesn't it? So that could have been the Corbyn effect. So it doesn't matter what you're doing within Lancashire and how much you're making an impact, you're always going to be at the mercy of the national picture. On the likability, I know we don't have a presidential system, but we do in many ways. The national picture will drive it. That's the problem you have when it's a politician who is standing for office under a Labour or Tory or Labour or Independent flag. You're always going to get that national picture influencing it. So you could be the best PCC ever, and this goes down to local councillors as well, isn't it? You could be the best local councillor, but if people don't like your leader, as what happened with Jeremy Corbyn, you're going to be out of office. And I think what you just said there, Dave, is it's following a national picture, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I think the Conservatives had a 80-seat majority, didn't they?
Yeah, so percentage-wise, if you transfer that to the PCC picture, you're going to get the same. I don't know why we didn't go to the stage of electing your Chief Constable. Because then they're seen as a cop leading policing rather than a politician leading policing.
I don't know what was wrong with the way it was.
Well, what was wrong with the way it was? Let's just...
There was no real influence, was there, by police authorities? They didn't really hold the Chief Constable to account. It was just a lot of councillors in a room, and there wasn't one person saying, I need this to happen, I need that to happen. Was it not just a nodding shop?
There was an oversight, I think, and it was someone for a Chief Constable to go and explain what they were doing and why they were doing on a regular basis, and to be asked intrusive questions by a panel that reflected the current political makeup of what the electorate had put into power. And if that changed at the next elections, there'd be a different political makeup on it. It was political, certainly, but it reflected the politics in a more plural way, that if you had 60% Conservative and 40% Labour, then that would be generally the makeup of the policing committee.
So it'd be like a select committee?
A little bit like that, yeah. But there was no clamour for them to be replaced, I don't think. I don't remember there being any great outcry about them. There was nothing coming except from a Home Office that, although it says it wanted to rid itself of responsibility for policing, central targets are back, Home Office targets are back, and they're still going to be laying those out onto police and crime commissioners and chief constables to say, achieve this for us, please.
It's the Home Office will give the heading of we are localising governance and letting local areas make their own policing decisions. But isn't there a whiff of the Home Office being able to pick up the phone, ring the like-minded political ally in an area and go, sort this, Sort of that unruly chief constable that keeps saying negative things about us on the TV or...
Well, it's an interesting point you raise, isn't it? And I suppose it's a bit like your MPs. How much of their policy is influenced by their masters at CCHQ or Labour HQ, whoever happens to be in power?
As a middle ground then, Richard, why was it councillors as part of the police authority? Why couldn't it be the group of MPs for that county?
Councillors, I think, are meant to be representative more of individual wards and a more sort of granular level of local democracy. Not always the case, but meant to be more independent of the central party and more reflective of what their ward, their electorate needs.
For the county of Lancashire, we have, how many do we have? 8? How many do we have? MPs for it? Why don't we have that group of people? They're elected on a wider political platform. They're used to debating, they're used to being on select committees, they're used to getting into the granular detail of it. Your mate's mum who's on, the local ward for Chorley or something isn't going to be into that detail, are they?
At the end, most of the bill for policing is paid by the local council, not by the national government, is what it comes down to, I think. And for MPs, as we know from the headed House of Commons note paper letters that arrive at Chief Constables daily, there's no shortage of the ability for MPs to intervene directly at Chief Constable level to raise issues of concern for them.
And those letters certainly get things moving, don't they? There's no two ways about that.
No, absolutely. They find their way back to the front line fairly quickly.
You make a good point earlier on about who actually asked for this, Dave, and we get a turnout of 15%, and it goes up to 30% because we lump it in with the local election. So it's pick one person from column 1, pick 2 people from column 2, and it's like a mentor exam sometimes.
Well, there was no information. I mean, we were all in the police at the time serving, and so you'd think we would have some sort of interest. I didn't have a clue about who stood for what.
And on the ballot paper, it would say Dave Thomas, Labour, Steve Bradshaw, Conservative. Wouldn't it? So people will pick the party over the name because they go, I ain't got a clue who this guy is.
Yeah, and it goes back to the Electoral Commission, didn't they? They criticised the minister saying that people had insufficient information. Full stop.
And to make a very important choice. And the other thing happens when they're rolled into Metro Mayor type positions, where you're rolling in some fairly powerful official that's elected in locally to have a mayoral type function, but also rolled into that is the Police and Crime Commissioner role. And we know from the Windsor report recently into Cresta Dick and her falling out with the Mayor of London that you can get things happening with PCC power and influence that are not necessarily following all the steps that should be taken if you want to dispense with the services of a Chief Constable. It's possible for you to make their position so difficult that they resign rather than go through the proper process of replacing a Chief Constable, short-circuiting all those protections that were put in place around the independence.
He was heavily critical, wasn't he?
Windsor set out in a lot of detail what happened and chronologically who said what and when. And from that, it is apparent that whatever else happened, all of those safeguards and steps and measures that were meant to be in place to make sure that a Chief Constable couldn't be summarily dismissed by a Police and Crime Commissioner, they don't hold the line. They're not strong enough. They're not compulsory. You can still get rid of your Chief Constable without going through the proper steps and obeying and observing the checks and balances. That's just a truth, and that says that it's a position that's so powerful they can dispense with Chief Constables arbitrarily.
So one person is therefore able to get rid of the Chief Constable for very political reasons because they want to hold on to their own high office. Change that to the electorate getting rid of that Chief Constable or Commissioner, etc., because then they can go and they can have that policing fight with the Mayor and say, well, you can't get rid of me, it's the electorate, so they might get rid of you before they get rid of me, and you're on more of an equal footing. You shouldn't be the servant of the Commissioner.
Or just use the due process that's set down. If you are a Police and Crime Commissioner, a Metro Mayor, whatever, and you are not happy with the performance of your Chief Constable to the point when you want to get rid of them, start the due process.
Going back to what you said, Steve, about maybe it should have been the public that decided whether the Commissioner should have resigned. I mean, in all honesty, do the general public at large know or even care about the administration, if you want, and policy setting of their police force?
No, like I say, it's a 5%. I'm picking a number out of the air now, but say 5% of that 30% of people that voted. That's not a representation of an electorate, and it's well below the numbers that you would need from a trade union body to get the members out on strike. Yeah. Have somebody who has been on the Strategic Command course, has the rank of at least Assistant Chief Constable, and say, right, these are your candidates. And like we said on previous podcasts, if you vote me in on this mandate, I will concentrate on those 10 things. And I will do that for the next 4 or 5 years.
Do you not think there's a general apathy in the public, though? And it's not a criticism at all, because I'm part of that group, and I'm feeling sorry for them, and I'm feeling sorry for myself with the state of politics. You know, like you say, the turnouts have been poor. I mean, even the very recent Conservative elections to find the next leader of the party, I mean, 80% or thereabout voted. Now, you would have thought, surely, that 100% of the party would have voted. There's only 130-odd thousand members, so what were the other 20% thinking?
Exactly, and they're voting for their leader, and it's a very select amount of people. So when you boil it down to, was it only tens of thousands of people that actually voted for our new Prime Minister?
But it was quite close.
That can get tested at the next election in a couple of years, and you know, I disagree with this party system because it comes down to the leaders themselves, and there's a lot to be said for a presidential type system.
I don't like the presidential system. Don't like the way that's been going, but you set out probably a mechanism of getting new police and crime commissioners that were probably better suited to the job, maybe. The other alternative is just stop having them, because they're a terrible idea, because it's an overweening amount of power in one person. You can see that across the country, Cressida Dick's not the only victim of pressure from a police and crime commissioner to stand down. It's just not a good system. It's an experiment. Stick it back on the Home Office. You still want to be able to put targets on the police. You still want to be able to do strategic national directions for the police. You can leave it to local 3-year and 5-year policing plans and all that sort of thing, and you can have a look over those and make sure that they're right. You can leave it with a local committee from the local council to do that day-to-day or week-to-week monitoring of what's happening and set a strategic direction. You set the strategic direction anyway, Home Office, so why not just get honest about it, say police and crime commissioners have failed as an experiment. They haven't given the benefit of principled oversight that we expected. They haven't enjoyed a great democratic support from electorates. It's time to stop it. It's an experiment that's had its time and failed.
Do you remember a good few years ago now, going back to the American system and their chief of police, it was called the toughest sheriff in the world. And the system, well, certainly the system in California side of the US was that the police chief is in charge of everything to do with criminal justice. So not only is he in charge of the police force, he's in charge of the prisons, everything. And this guy was, I suppose you'd call him right-wing, I suppose. But certainly he didn't tolerate fools or criminals and was criticised for having people in chain gangs, and rather than build new prisons, he put a tented village in the middle of the desert with no fence around it. You know, if you want to escape, good luck. You've got 100 miles either way to walk. And that proved very popular. I mean, I'm making a bit of a joke about it, aren't I? But, I mean, could that system work in the UK, where our Chief Constable is in charge of the prisons within their area?
I wouldn't want it. And Sheriff Joe was a populist, didn't end up remaining in office for that long at the end of the day, really. I think he got
Did he get locked up for something?
Not sure about that. I'd have to check that. But what he did was very popular, yes, the pink underwear stuff. And he instituted pink underwear because he thought there was a problem with people stealing prison underwear. So he had it dyed pink to make it less stealable. And the tent village thing.
There's a pops right there. That's problem oriented.
That's a third pit there, isn't
Yeah. Why should you have a leader of policing involved in prisons? We get into a whole different thing there. What is a prison for? Is it about rehabilitation, punishment, or is it about containment? And that's a whole other podcast.
Yeah.
Sheriff Joe's were clearly about punishment and containment. There wasn't a whole lot of rehabilitation going on there.
What you're going to get from electing your chief constable or your chief of police in America or something, you are potentially going to get a little bit of the hang 'em high scenario and more robust policing, because everybody wants things sorting out, but don't you dare bring my son to my door telling him he's part of the problem.
Yeah. Well, and perhaps it'd be counterproductive, and there'd be a huge log jam. You only have to look at the immigration policies at the moment. Now it's now flying through the courts of appeal and the Supreme Court, and it's just treading water. I want to go back to the statement that was made in 2010 by the coalition government, and the reason why PCCs came into it. And it said the establishment of PCCs has allowed for the Home Office to withdraw from day-to-day policing. I remember at the time thinking, these guys are going to be made scapegoats, because the government is saying, well, here's your money, it's your responsibility to spend it how you want. So therefore, we're not telling you what to do. We all know, looking in hindsight now in 2022, that the Home Office very definitely hasn't withdrawn from policing. And if anything, their involvement, I was going to say interference, depending on which side of the fence you sit on, is increased, I would say.
There's been an ongoing attempt to rejig the budget settlement for various counties and areas, which is still not resolved. And part of the Home Office withdrawing from it was to say, actually funding, here's your central grant, but locally for policing, you're going to have to raise the precept. By that I mean you're going to have to raise your local council tax by an amount to pay for more policing if you want more policing. Police and crime commissioners, off you go and advocate for that with your local electorates. And there you get that tension between, I want to be a popular politician with a good mandate, I want to be re-elected, and I'm coming to my electorate, putting my hands in their pockets, specifically for more money for policing. Now, in the abstract, more policing is a thing that people will like if it's more neighbourhood policing, if it's Bobby's on the beat, if it's the Peter Hitchens continuum view of the world. But actually putting your hand in your pocket to pay extra pounds a week or for more policing, that's a whole different thing.
Yeah, and you make a very valid point, and it allows the Prime Minister or the Home Secretary to stand at the dispatch box and say, well, it's not us putting the cost of policing up in your area. Mr MP, you need to speak to your PCC because they're the one who raised the precept, not us. We have this central government funding model, which has worked. So, not our fault. Thanks very much.
And that's the step away the Home Office are doing, I think. It was a step away from having to address the funding problem between different forces, and that some get proportionately a lot more from the central government precept than others. For some, it may be sort of 20% of their income. For some, it may be 35% of their income.
I don't know why it has to be so complicated. Steve, you've said it many times before. Everybody knows what they want the police to do. We all know what we should be doing.
Well, look at my rosette is basically what it boils down to. Not look at my policies, not look at my strategic plan. It's, I got a blue rosette, I got a red rosette. And that's what it's come down to. And some of these police and crime commissioners, for all that you know about what they do to policing, for some, there's very little evidence that they're doing much more than enjoying the ride.
Well, that's the other thing I was going to bring up, and you've nicely brought me to it, is the actual cost of the PCCs. I was trying to find out the cost difference between the police authorities as was then and then the new system of the PCCs, and whether, because one of the other reasons was it was brought in to reduce money, but there's a big variation in salaries on PCCs depending on which force you're in. Just plucking a few up, West Midlands Police, their PCCs paid 100,000 quid. Cumbria is 66,000. I think ours in Lancashire gets about 68. Could be wrong. 86,000. And so there's massive variations, and I suppose that's to the size and complexity of crime. But there is no cap on how many staff the PCC can employ. And back in 2013, the BBC did an article, and they said that as of that date, 2013, the PCCs between them had employed at least 449 people. It's quite staggering, that, isn't it?
Unelected people as well.
That will not have gone backwards either. I can guarantee you that the number of staffers and advisors and office staff will have increased. There will be no PCC, and I'll bet coffee on this, that will have reduced their staff from 2013 to now. The offices will all have got bigger. Guarantee you that.
Do you remember that? I think it was Kent Police, the ill-fated youth police crime commissioner, Paris Brown, she was called. Yes. And she had to resign a few days later because of some questionable tweets that she'd put out previously.
This was Anne Barnes as the police and crime commissioner for Kent. I won't go into it, but on YouTube you can find, I think, a Channel 4 documentary that was made on her first year in post, and it's instructive. That's all I'll say. A massive embarrassment to Kent Constabulary, a massive embarrassment to the Office of Police and Crime Commissioner with whatever vestiges of dignity it might hold after that. It's a shocker. My favourite of it, I'll just do one, is she'd bought a motorhome which she called Anforce One or something like that, so she could motor around to see the good people of Kent and turn up on Asda car parks and things. And she was saying it was a great alternative to some big pile of German high-tech machinery. Cut to her arriving in a BMW onto the car park into a reserved space in the morning. So, you know, it was horrible. But I'll guarantee that there'll be agglomerations of roles and expenses.
Yeah, the deputy is unelected. Everyone else in that office is unelected, has influence on the oversight of a chief constable and stuff. It doesn't sit right.
What I'll say with Steve's idea of elected chief constables is, for me, that doesn't sit well with the whole fear and favour thing of policing. Because as soon as you've got an electorate involved, then you are responsible to that electorate, and do you want to get voted back in again? And for a chief constable to be operating at the whim of an electorate doesn't seem right. And when you've seen a chief constable operating proxy by the will of the electorate, where a police and crime commissioner has got involved, it doesn't bode well for the independence of that chief constable. It doesn't bode well for their ability to police without fear or favour. The minimum you can get an electorate involved in, I would say, is like the old police authority. Is there a legitimate role for politically elected representatives to question what the police are doing in their area? Absolutely there is. There must be. That's an accountability that we need to have. Is it right that it's exercised through one person? No, I don't think so. Is it right that you put that elected person operationally in charge of the police day to day? No, I don't think it is, because you run into those fear or favour problems. For those of you who have ever been involved in a political investigation, a police investigation that sort of goes onto the grounds of politics or a politician, that can be pretty tricky. You can be getting phone calls, and if you've got something that involves a politician, yeah, it goes up that high. That amount of monitoring is on your investigation. Now, would you want someone that's subject to those pressures running policing in your area? I don't think so. I really don't think so.
I see it from a different point of view. If you made that chief constable electable, they're on an equal footing then with these people that might apply some political pressure, and they are more solid in their basis of saying no.
You won't get cut through, because we said before with police and crime commissioners, who knows what they really stand for in the electorate? Who's read their manifesto? What we have with an old system, with or without a police and crime commissioner, to be fair, is that a number of candidates for that top job in policing in your area are meant to sit down and be interviewed and put forward their case, put forward their CV, put forward their achievements and their ambitions and what their vision thing is for if they're appointed. And they're the people in front of them, or the person in front of them is then able to ask them questions, get a sense of what they are and who they are and whether they're suitable for the job.
Well, I see it as more independent. I see it as more sterile and having the light of the public shining on it, because whispers and nods and winks in back rooms and political favours and police and crime commissioner, or, somebody who says, look, gives a nod and a wink to a PCC, you make me your chief constable and, we can do wonderful things with your plan together. I'm not saying that happens, but, it's less transparent. We do need interference by the public, and that's the problems we're having with this breakdown with communities. They don't have a say, they don't have a voice, and we need that influence and, quote, interference at the ballot box.
A stuff thing that needs to happen, perhaps, we have packed meetings, police and communities together, as it was called, where you would meet. But actually, if nothing ever comes of those, if people attend their first one or two, but nothing changes locally because we can't put neighbourhood bobbies back on their street, we can't keep the PCSOs out there, we're just seeing in the cars going from A to B, responding. If the acquisitive crime in their community, the drug dealing in their community, the antisocial behaviour in the community carries on unabated, then people stop coming to the meetings.
And we're in a strange place with the political process at the moment. I know we had 4 prime ministers in 6 years now. I mean, there's no continuity, there's stability there, is there at all?
We're getting to the best people in the party now, aren't we?
Really? Are we?
Yeah, oh, goodness me, yeah.
The most fanatical loyalists, certainly.
Well, there you go. It's an interesting topic. Could be quite dry, politics, can't we? They all say never talk about politics or religion. That's it for this week. and thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Thin Blue Mind with Bradshaw, Horton and Thomas. Policing insights and opinion. Well, that's it for this week. Thank you for joining us. This podcast is in partnership with Policing TV, the leading policing media channel. So until the next time, on the next podcast, take care.